On this Friday morning, it is time for the Classic Game Club. We are going back to 2001. 20 years ago today, one of the greatest finals in Wimbledon history took place. It was Pat Rafter versus Goran Ivanisevic. The same day, Colm Boohig, that The Office debuted on BBC. Is this day in 2001 the greatest day in the history of humankind?
It might just be, Owen Sheehan. It might. Soundtrack by Craig David that summer, I think. It was a great time to be alive. And Goran Ivanisevic grabbed that spirit and ran with it that day in centre court, that Monday, that People's Monday against Pat Rafter. So many great quotes attributed with it, but one that has never left my mind, like Junior Sir Shakespeare, is I wouldn't mind putting my racket away if God let me win today, which apparently was Goran Ivanisevic's first thing he said when he woke up that Monday morning after losing the final 3 times at Wimbledon in the 1990s. But the atmosphere, lads, as you both know, for this match is just 20 years later, still spine-tingling.
You've rewatched the full thing this week. It's about 17 hours long. Is it the greatest tennis match of all time?
In terms of ability and quality, absolutely not. Way down the list. In terms of tension and atmosphere and pressure and what was on the line, and it was last chance saloon. These guys barely played tennis ever again afterwards. By far number one. Easily the best ever. 7 years later, between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, that was the best quality tennis match ever. That was also Wimbledon final, and the atmosphere was brilliant, but this is untouchable. And the beauty was, of course, it was a day late because of the rain over the weekends. This is pre-roof days, and the tickets were open to the public. First come, first served. And as you look back in the video, you see a sea of yellow for Australia and red and white for Croatia. And it's, as Adrian Barry was saying to me last night when he was watching it back, it was like a football match, and even more specifically, every point in the last 2 games was cheered like in a penalty shootout. It was unbelievable.
Adrian, you love this.
It was class. My memory of anything is so bad, but People's Monday, definitely I remember that, and I remember thinking about, at the time, the opportunity that existed, and everybody was talking about the fact that, like Colm was saying, it was first come, first served, and there was like every sort of rag and bone merchant was allowed in, and I think that fed into the atmosphere, Colm. It was an incredible day, but I thought that at that time, my recollection of it was that there was a possibility that like in terms of, we're talking obviously about the context and the background to it, that People's Monday could become a thing, that actually like Wimbledon could move away from this slight snooty reputation that it had of the strawberries and cream and all these very refined people, that there was an opportunity to make it a bit more of the people's game, to harness some of People's Monday, even outside of the fact that obviously it got pushed that way because of rain, and then obviously they built a roof, and so that comes out of the equation, but that there was philosophically some way to say, geez, that was cool, could we do more of that? But obviously that didn't happen. No,
and I'm glad it didn't either. There was brief discussion afterwards, just because it was such a raging success, accidentally so. But like a lot of things, when it's rare, it's beautiful. And I wouldn't touch this, and it's in the annals of history, and it's actually in the Wimbledon Museum. If you go there, Goran Ivanisevic's gear from that day is hung up. And if the final means a lot to you, and if you see that kit hung up and the trophy there next to him and pictures from that final, it just brings back all these sorts of memories. But it's just an incredible story. If you set down to write this story, you wouldn't do much better than what actually happened in reality, which is this guy Ivanisevic, 125 in the world, only played at Wimbledon because of a wildcard entry. He's the first and only wildcard to win Wimbledon. The first unseeded player to win it since, I think, Boris Becker in 1985, up to that point. He had lost in the first round of Queens, and that was the day that they gave out the wildcard entries. And he's since said, actually in an interview only last year, he said, they mustn't have watched me that day because I was absolutely terrible. But thankfully they gave me a wildcard because they had nobody else to give it to. And that was because, of course, he got the 3 previous finals, so he lost to Andre Agassi in 1992, which is Agassi's one and only Wimbledon title. That was a 5-setter. Then 2 years later, Ivanisevic, when he was high as number 2 in the world rankings, so this is a serious operator. It wasn't like a complete wildcard for his whole career. He got to at least the quarterfinal of every Grand Slam in the 90s. And in 94, when he was world number 2, he lost to Pete Sampras pretty comfortably, actually, in straight sets, 6-love in the third. But then 4 years later, 1998, again, lost to Pete Sampras, as most people did in the 90s, but very cruelly in 5 sets. And it was his 3rd final defeat. And the real kind of sadness about that defeat was You can actually see it. It's on YouTube. Goran with his long hair and a beard, very different looking to us. He was in 2001, and he has the towel over his head and he's crying inconsolably on court. It's even worse off court. And he basically barely plays for the next 3 years through a combination of the shoulder injury that would eventually end his career and lack of motivation because he was so heartbroken from losing that third Wimbledon final, especially. And everything that he did in his tennis career after 98 was in reference or comparison to the fact that, yeah, I played well today, but I'm never going to win Wimbledon. So what's the point? And then 2001 hits.
Pat Cash talks eloquently about that, the aftermath of that third loss, and the commentary actually of that 2001 final. Just looking at the terms of the path and you know, the final itself in some ways, like it struck me looking at the last 20 minutes of it last night and going through his path to the final, that it was a handy All-Ireland. Like he had no. He had Carlos Moya, he had a too young Andy Roddick, he had Greg Ruzetsky, who everybody was beating, Marat Safin, who won 2 Grand Slams, but also kind of a weird career in that, like, it wasn't somebody who was competing regularly. Wimbledon definitely wasn't his forte. Tennis's great failure in Tim Henman, and even in Rafter, how often do you get to play somebody who's like, he was world number 10, who wasn't like in the top 5 in the world in a final like that? I put it to you, Colm Boohig, it was Clare 2013 or it was Kerry 2014.
Hey now.
Whoa. I mean, Adrian, I'm as outraged as you now as Martin Lipton was earlier, because that is an outrageous statement.
Handy All-Ireland.
Carlos Moya won the French Open. He was a Grand Slam winner before that meeting. That was in the second round. In the third round, he played Andy Roddick, one of the hottest prospects.
Too young Andy Roddick.
Won the US Open very shortly afterwards. Greg Ruzetsky, the much maligned Ruzetsky, but he had reached the US Open final. Another Grand Slam finalist. Marat Safin, as you say, a 2-time Grand Slam champion. And Tim Henman was a 4-time Wimbledon semi-finalist who was only ever beaten by Pete
a loser,
Sampras
exactly.
So for a guy who barely had picked up a racket for 3 years,
you have to accept it was. I'm not saying that they weren't good tennis players, but like the path to the final and the final itself.
I'm not saying they weren't good tennis players.
It wasn't laden. It wasn't laden with players that people are going to talk about in 30 years.
Who did you want? Did you want like Sampras, Agassi, Djokovic, Nadal, Federer?
Yeah, exactly. You got to beat. It's not Ireland unless you beat Dublin, like Kerry now for 2014.
Well, he beat in Pat Rafter. He beat the man who reached the previous year's Wimbledon final and lost to Sampras. And Rafter had beaten Andre Agassi in the semi-final of this year. So got revenge actually after losing to Agassi in the semi-final of the Australian Open earlier that year, which Ivanisevic had to qualify for and lost in qualifying. So again, any player of note at all with any form or any slam success or promising talent, everybody was favoured against Ivanisevic. And up till and including the semi-final, nobody was really talking about it. The semi-final was Henman, Rafter, Agassi, and that Ivanisevic guy who used to get the finals. Everyone wrote him off, and rightly so. And look what he did, and he loved that. I mean, you couldn't get a better beating Dublin story than Goran Ivanisevic winning Wimbledon, because his biggest threat, his biggest opposition, Adrian, was himself. He was his own Dublin.
Agree. Yeah.
What is the defining moment in this match?
Well, there's so many. I mean, first of all, he has 4 championship points. So, and in the first 2, he double faults, which is just impossible to watch. But really the defining moment before that was at 6-7 in the 5th and final set. Ivanisevic was love 30 down on his own serve, and then he was at deuce. So twice he was only 2 points from defeat. Pat Rafter should have won this. But Ivanisevic holds, and then at 7-all, Rafter serves, and Ivanisevic breaks him quite convincingly, actually, with a passing forehand as Rafter's approaching the net. And just before that point, the commentator said that it's 15-40 as Rafter's about to serve 2 virtual match points for Ivanisevic. Such was the strength of his serve game in the 90s and very early 90s. Ivanisevic was pretty much untouchable and unparalleled at a time when aces were prevalent in the game. Once Ivanisevic got that passing shot against Rafter to go 8-7 up, that really was the game. That was a turning point. But then the emotion and the roller coaster ride of that game when Ivanisevic served it out itself is Netflix documentary worthy.
That 8-7 moment for me, I thought that was a huge, like, it's less sexy than the stuff that happens afterwards and probably gets talked about less, but that the return of serve to go whatever it was 8-7 up, and because of what followed, as I said, like that, the double fault stuff, it feels maybe less sexy, but like Rafter was doing what Rafter did with that sort of serve and volley stuff and comes to the net and he just takes a slight jink to the left on his left foot, which is like a like less than the width of a tennis racket to his left hand side, and it's enough for Ivanisevic to open up and pass it by him, and that just was such a like he disappears. There's so many moments in that match I think that are incredible, but I do think that might be the one.
Do you see that passing shot when, as you say, Rafter slightly wrong foots himself and Ivanisevic passes him? The crowd just anticipate that. They're almost cheering just as Ivanisevic connects with the ball at all before they even know its destination, because it's the weight of pressure and the thing that he's actually going to break him here. And then when they take a break and sit down before the final game, the match, Ivanisevic, just like he did after losing in 98, puts the towel over his head again. So he's trying to, in some way, calm himself and be composed. And then the last game is anything but that. It's chaos from the start. I mean, he hits the second serve and he has an easy net volley. Ivanisevic as Rafter returns and the crowd is cheering already and he puts it long. He's just so tight. And he alludes to that in the on-court post-match interview with Sue Barker. He said, oh my God, I was so tight and thank God Rafter missed, because I was never going to win that otherwise. And it goes on from there. Like, there's just so many amazing points up until the first championship point. But the best part is that between every point, the crowd are just going wild. I mean, how these guys didn't break down in tears, I don't know. Because I remember watching it crying at the time. I remember, like, I couldn't handle this. I had no affiliation with these guys at all. I mean, the BBC did an interview with Ivanisevic in the first week, and the team was Goran's split personality. So he had 3 different personalities, because he was going to explode at any moment, this guy in the court. And actually in the fourth set he did. He got punished for a foot fault and he kicked the net in anger and shouted at the umpire. And that was kind of standard fare for Ivanisevic. And he did this interview the first week and it was a split screen, the 3 different sides of Ivanisevic, and I was just immediately endeared to this guy. And from then on, I supported him, and to the point where a week and a half later, I was inconsolable watching the final set because I thought he might lose again. I mean, that's the power of it. And then you take that feeling from a person who didn't really know him at all to half of that crowd in centre court who were Croats who were obsessed with him and idolised them. And if you look around to the crowd, it's just people not being able to speak. Instead, they just shout. It's unbelievable.
Give us your wrap-up then on the aftermath, the legacy of this match on both men.
Well, I think what kind of adds to it is almost like mythical now, 20 years on, is that basically neither man really played after that again. Rafter played the Davis Cup at the end of that year, 2001, for Australia, and won it. Then he set out all of 2002 because of injuries, and in January 2003 he announced his retirement. So that was his last match. So the great sadness of Rafter, although he won 2 US Opens in a row, he also lost 2 Wimbledon finals in a row. And for Ivanisevic, that troubling shoulder problem that kept him out for 3 years before that he actually had to get medical time out in the 3rd set of the final. He got surgery pretty much straight after that match, actually announced his retirement in 2002, but came back out of it to play one more time in Wimbledon in 2004. Quite impressively got to the 3rd round, where he lost to the 2002 champion Leighton Hewitt. And after that match on court, Ivanisevic ripped off his shirt, which he had a habit of doing. He loved doing that, win or lose. And he put on a Croatia jersey because that night Croatia were playing England in Euro 2004. So he wanted to rile the crowd. And I guess that's the greatest way to end a career that I can think of. So the legacy is that they basically both went straight into retirement, and everybody was able to sit on that match and enjoy it, as anyone can, and go on YouTube and watch it back, because in terms of scintillating sporting moments, for me, it's untouched, it's unparalleled. It's the best atmosphere of any match I've ever seen. And I wasn't at it. I was just watching it through TV, so I can only imagine what it was like to be there. And if you're on YouTube and you look at the comments, it's littered with people saying, I was there, I will never forget that.
Yeah, it is a pretty special moment. Colm, thanks so much for bringing this to the table this week. The full thing is available on YouTube. If you don't have, whatever it is, 4 hours to watch it, the last 20, 30 minutes, we would highly advise. Colm, good stuff.